Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Melinda Nusafora. Well, more than 3 weeks in, the Khashoggi killing continues to unravel its secrets. The international community is demanding answers and accountability for those responsible for the journalist's death. Saudi Arabia's Attorney General says it's now treating the case as a murder investigation. The declaration comes as Turkish and Saudi prosecutors start piecing together the details. Riyadh has repeatedly changed its story. The kingdom initially denied all knowledge of the writer's whereabouts when he went missing on October 2nd, but later admitted he was killed at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, blaming rogue agents. Saudi's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who many accuse of orchestrating the incident, has also come out saying the killing was a heinous crime, vowing to bring those responsible to justice. But this hasn't stopped the diplomatic backlash, with the European Union urging an arms embargo on Saudi Arabia and the United States promising visa restrictions and sanctions. Joining me now in our Istanbul studio is Daily Sabah columnist Hilal Kaplan. Thanks for being here. And also Borzo Dargaki is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council specialising in Middle Eastern affairs. Every day we have seen twists and turns with this case. We're going to leave the specifics of the investigation to one side and look at why. Why 3 weeks in is this still making global headlines? And as a columnist for Daily Sabah, Halal, I'm going to start with you. What is Turkey's end game here? These regular leaks to the media that have kept this in the spotlight, is that just for the greater good of getting to the bottom of this investigation, or is Turkey hoping to use this as a little bit of leverage, perhaps against Saudi, perhaps against the United States?
First of all, it's in the headlines because it's newsworthy globally. A journalist has been killed in the consulate of his own country, so this is an unprecedented event. And secondly, yes, Turkey applied a clever strategy here, I think, before an official coming out and owning up all these evidences. They drip by drip fed the media and controlled the narrative about how this investigation will go. And if you remember, the Saudis were in flat denial at first, but then day by day, as the headlines suggested that this is a premeditated murder, they had to accept and drop the pretense and face the music.
But why? I mean, it does get to the point of the investigation. Politically, why? Is there another strategy behind this for Turkey?
When you look at the Crown Prince's actions in the last 3 years, he became the Crown Prince for the last 1 year, but we know that he is very strong on Saudi policy. The war in Yemen, the blockade on Qatar, and the Muslim Brotherhoods being designated as a terrorist group, all these things are events that Turkey does not like and agree with. So we can say that also the Crown Prince is not in a very good mood with Turkey as well, because if you remember, he made his first visit to Egypt last year as Crown Prince, and from a meeting with journalists there, it was leaked that he called Turkey, Qatar and Iran as the triangle of evil in the region. So he did not deny saying this, and it wouldn't be surprised to hear him say this, because he sees Turkey as a rival in the region that he has to combat with. And of course, Turkey's relations with its neighbor Iran also doesn't please the Crown Prince. So I guess in this sense, although there is not an overall out there conflict between the two countries, they have their differences.
And Borzo, let me put this to you. Because of those differences that Halal has just outlined for us, is Turkey using this as a way to maybe erode some of the Crown Prince's power?
I mean, why not? Why wouldn't it? And I'm not sure if this is Erdogan's thinking per se, or a strategy developed in coordination with others. Maybe it's his communications team, sort of coming out with a very brilliant way of, day by day, not just weakening the Crown Prince, but also just destroying the credibility of Saudi Arabia. I mean, every single statement that they've come out with, they've had to walk back on this issue. And that is very damaging for Saudi Arabia. And this comes after spending tens of millions of dollars on communications, companies and PR firms and various crisis management strategists. And this is how badly they're sort of squirming. As I spoke to one person who said, it must be so delicious for Erdogan to be tightening the screws on MBS after all that MBS has done, all the sort of hostility and venom, and let's not forget that he's also that Saudi is funding the SDF experiment in northern Syria, which Turkey is very much against. It must be very, regardless of whether there's a strategy there. And we know that Erdogan is kind of an emotional, shoot-from-the-hip guy. Maybe he's not thinking 2-3 years ahead. It just must be kind of a good feeling of comeuppance to churn the tables, so to speak.
And also don't forget, this is unprecedented for Turkey as well. We are not some third world country where journalists got killed on a daily basis. So this is also outrageous in that sense. And Erdogan knows that Istanbul and Turkey is a safe haven for dissidents, especially from the Arab world. And he wants to make a statement.
I mean, you're also talking about she's got a really good point. You're talking about a very shishi part of Istanbul, Levant, where everyone in Turkey knows where it is. It's sort of this dream place where people want to buy a house, an apartment, and stuff like that. And this is an insult to the reputation of Turkey, of Istanbul, one that whether you're a supporter of Erdogan or you're an opponent. This is an affront. This is a violation of Turkish sovereignty.
And also don't forget, 2 days after the incident, the Khashoggi disappearance, the Crown Prince went to and gave an interview to Bloomberg and said that we don't know where he is. He left the consulate alive. You should ask Turkey. So they were very willing to put the blame on Turkey in the first place. So why not come out and say, no, you are the ones to blame.
How then, though, how much power then does that give Turkey and Erdogan when he comes out to say, we want to see these suspects be tried? Is there enough international pressure now, and can Turkey exert enough pressure to see that happen?
Turkey alone can't, of course, because, as you know, United States, especially after Trump, see Saudi Arabia as their first ally in the Middle East, the most central ally. So without US pressure, that kind of thing will not happen. And I believe they won't let the 18 suspects to stand trial in Istanbul, because in Turkey we have transparent trials open to public, and these people will probably come out and say who ordered them to do this.
What about you, Borzo? What do you think? Can we see enough international pressure led by Turkey to, one, see these people actually brought to justice, and two, see a bit more of a strong leadership from the United States, not just always siding with their ally Saudi Arabia?
I mean, on the second part, I think they're already sort of turning against it, and there is some kind of tipping point that's been reached with a lot of hostility built up over not just this incident, but also the war in Yemen that has been an issue in Congress. That, as to whether Saudi Arabia is willing to toss 18 people under the bus in order to clear MBS and have a sort of trial and then put these guys in prison for a few years, absolutely, they're willing to do that.
Has Turkey been successful in weakening him? Borzo, you first.
I absolutely think he's been weakened. And, forget about, I'll say this comment again. It's, forget about Vision 2030. It's more like Vision 1090. And that was the year that the Hashashin, the assassins, was established. So this definitely rebrands Saudi Arabia as this sort of very dark kind of very obscure place where this kind of thing can happen, where dissidents are they admitted in their own press release that there is a program, there's a general order to basically, they call it rendition, it's basically kidnappings abroad of dissidents to bring them back home. They admitted that. So, I mean, this is not a sort of modernizing kingdom by any stretch of the imagination.
Hilal, what do you think? Has Turkey's actions been effective in weakening MBS, and can he come back from this?
I think Turkey has done all that it could to weaken MBS. Not particularly for the aim of doing that, but in the end, the result was this. And like I said, without US support, I don't think the Crown Prince, I mean, it can be blocked, his accession to the throne can be blocked, because he has a very strong grip on power there. I mean, politically, the intelligence agencies, the army, the police, he controls all of them. And also, as you know, he locked up some of the royal family members. So he rules with this feeling of fear over the royal family.
Hilal Kaplan from the Daily Sabah, Borzu Dargaki, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. I appreciate both of your opinions. Thank you for being here on Straight Talk.
Thank you.
While the Saudi killing of one journalist has sent the world into a tailspin, their hand in the deaths of thousands of innocent civilians has largely gone unopposed. The Saudi-led war in Yemen has been raging for 3 years. Humanitarian groups say schools and civilians are being targeted, and vital food supply lines have been cut. And the United Nations has warned half the population could soon be on the brink of famine. Adil Halim reports.
The United Nations has called it the world's worst man-made humanitarian disaster. The UN's aid chief told the Security Council 14 million Yemenis, half the country's population, are now on the brink of famine.
Just to be clear, my assessment, my advice to you is that there is now a clear and present danger of an imminent and great big famine engulfing Yemen, much bigger than anything any professional in this field has seen during their working lives.
For 3 years, Yemen has been in the grips of a bloody war. But the puppet masters pulling the strings are a long way from the front line. In September 2014, a Shia Muslim minority, the Houthis, took advantage of Yemen's political instability and, with the support of Iran, took control of the capital, Sana'a. 6 months later, a Sunni Muslim coalition, led by Saudi Arabia and including the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Bahrain, launched a counterattack. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman masterminded the bombing campaign. A humanitarian group based in Yemen says 18,000 airstrikes have rocked the country since 2015. That's one every hour and a half. 1/3 of those have hit non-military targets, like this school bus, which was blown up in August. 51 people, including 40 children, were killed.
Nearly 20% of the deaths of civilians are children. So that's 1 in 5. Civilian killed as a child, under 18. That's a lot of children.
Amnesty International estimates 2.5 million children have dropped out of school, fearing their classrooms could be the next target. Those still attending are putting on a brave face.
We tell the enemies that our classmates' blood won't be in vain and that we'll avenge them by getting an education. We will avenge them by learning.
But that's hard to do on an empty stomach. Yemen imports 90% of its food, but the major port city of Hodeidah remains a hotly contested battleground. That means vital supply lines are cut off, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis. UNICEF says 18.5 million people don't know where their next meal is coming from.
Since September, we still cannot access 51,000 tons of grain stocks at the Red Sea mill facilities, which, as you remember, have been attacked in September. If we could access these mill facilities and the grain stocks, we could help an additional 3.7 million people over the course of 1 month.
The weak and vulnerable have no immune system to fight off deadly outbreaks of cholera and diphtheria. And with no end to the war in sight, aid groups fear these people can't cling to life for much longer. Adil Halim, Straight Talk.
Joining me now to discuss this in the studio is former Health Minister in Yemen, Najib Khamen, who is now a Member of Parliament for the Al-Islah Party. And from London, we are joined by Banu Badnagar, who is a spokesman for the humanitarian agency Save the Children. Banu, we're going to start with you first of all, and we're going to talk humanitarian aid. So much of the aid that has been sent to Yemen just isn't getting through. Why?
Well, I mean, Yemen has become the world's biggest humanitarian disaster, kind of a stain on the world's conscience, because it's entirely man-made. And you just mentioned the access issues. That goes back approximately a year to when the Saudi-led coalition put in force a blockade of the main port in Yemen, in Hodeidah. Now, Hodeidah is very important because it's the point at which 80% of most of the goods that come into Yemen go through. And so the whole country relies on food and fuel that comes through Hodeidah. So the month-long blockade of Hodeidah last year has led to a knock-on effect, which we're basically seeing the effects of even now. And that's leading to a whole host of problems, from disease and hunger to malnutrition.
Najib, you've got a slightly different take on why the humanitarian aid isn't reaching the people who need it. What's your take on this issue?
To a large extent, I not, my view incompatible with what your guest said. There is no a real blockade for the food coming via this Hodeidah shipport. And there is so many shipports are still open under the control of the legitimate power, and also under the supervision of the late coalition led by Saudis.
So if these ports are still open, why isn't the aid getting through?
So many shipports are still open, including Hodeidah. Even the passage of the food coming from Hodeidah, till now, is still open. There is a blockade for the military weapons, which is really under the highly restricted, observation by the legitimate and also power, also by the Saudis as well. So this is the blockade for the military, not the food. The problem is some of this food has been really stolen by the militias of Houthis, and unfortunately they used to sell it back in the black market to feed their machinery, war machinery. In continuous way. So this is one of the main issue, one of the main problem. The problem is some of these reports coming from inside Yemen, mainly from Sana'a. Biased reports used to be misled the international community by this, between two brackets, blockade of the passage of food from. Also, there is another, routes, which is now working very, very, very actively, which is via Salalah shipport. So Salalah shipport in Oman working very actively in these days, Aden shipport working, and also Makalla shipport working, including Hodeidah.
You're a current Member of Parliament. The government in Yemen is supported by the Saudi-led coalition. And as you say, Saudi has been providing humanitarian aid to Yemen, but there can be no doubt that the airstrikes and some of the attacks carried out by the Saudi-led coalition have been devastating and have exacerbated this humanitarian crisis. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, it may have some part, but not that main part. Yeah, it may have some. I can admit, no problem. There are so many mistakes in the airstrikes and attacking civilian people, including children and women. Yeah, we can't ignore these things. As also member of the parliaments, we always in contact with our partners and always, raise all these issues, which is really very painful to us. We would like to avoid all this. We would like really to stop the war, but really the problem is why we can't stop the war is the coup itself. So when we would like to stop the war, we have to stop the reason of this war. The reason of this war started by the coup by Houthis and also by the Iran influence in our country. Mm-hmm. So this is the problem,
Banu, I'm going to bring you back into the discussion here. Why do you think that largely the international community has turned a blind eye to this current situation in Yemen?
I'll get to that in a second. If I may, I'd just like to respond to some of the doctor's points there about alternative routes, because there's a number of things that need to be looked at. First of all, there aren't that many other routes. The doctor's suggesting Salalah in another country. It's very, very far away, the land route, to send commercial and humanitarian aid through Salalah in Oman and then to transport it overland. And remember, we know that there are elements of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in the far east of Yemen, and for aid to go through those areas. Then we have the other port in Aden, which is not nearly able to handle the large amounts of aid that Hodeidah port is able to handle. And Aden port is already at full capacity. And once again, any aid that goes through Aden also has to go via land routes to some of the most deprived people in the north of the country.
What do you say to Dr. Najib's assertion that the Houthi rebels are actually stealing this aid? Is that something you've seen?
We haven't, look, we believe that all parties in this conflict are causing this catastrophe. And so while we absolutely believe that, you know, the Houthis are you know, breaking international humanitarian law, so are the Saudis. But we also know that the Saudis have killed far more civilians and children over the past 3 years than the Houthis have. Now, the point is, we would like to see all parties in this conflict to stop fighting and to come to the negotiating table in good faith.
Okay, well then let me ask you now, Najib, we had the latest round of peace talks in September collapse. Do you believe that both parties will come to the negotiating table, and is that the only way we'll see an end to this conflict?
Yeah, we were about to reach a mutual conception and mutual agreement about what is going on and what we are going to make to stop this war. And we were about to sign it. And even in Kuwait, our delegation, the legitimate, you know, government delegation, already signed, you know, points, which is, you know, a draft of the agreement. And the Houthis were about to sign it. But Iran intervention came because there is some Iranian advisor they were there in. And they use even in Geneva, also in Kuwait, and they tell them that, they told them that, no, don't sign it. See, once the Iran put their hands out of Yemen, and the Houthis have their own, you know, rights and free to negotiate, I think we can sit together.
So you don't believe that there can be a resolution until Iran doesn't have a hand in it? Could the same be said for the Saudi-led coalition?
Absolutely. Really, to be honest, really, Saudis and Emirates are pushing us to reach a mutual agreement with the Houthis in favor of our national interest. But the problem is the Iran, and they used to. What's the main cause of those interventions? They would like to transfer the, the coup, intervention into a legitimate power to be accepted by Yemenis, by the regional, powers, and also by the international community. So this is the main issue which we will not accept it. If they want to be a ruler, they have to go to the election ballot, and they will transfer into fair and free election in a peaceful manner and condition, and we will accept no problem. Whatever they will choose come, nobody will opposite this thing. But with tanks, with force, nobody will accept in Yemen. And this is the real problem, that they would like to transfer this coup power into legitimate power in Yemen.
Banu, I can see you shaking your head there. You seem to disagree with some of those points. What would you like to add?
No, I mean, I agree with some of the things that the doctor is saying, but he speaks about elections and the ballot box. But the fact remains, there is an active war going on in Yemen right now, and approximately 130 children are dying every single day. And so, we can talk all we want about the ballot box, but the fighting has to stop in order for us to get to a point where we could have an election and have a legitimate vote. And for that to happen, like I said before, all parties need to come to the table. I mean, our teams work on the ground in Yemen, and we are hearing desperate stories every single day. Just yesterday, I spoke to a Yemeni mother who was forced to sell her home just to feed her 5 children. And so she was facing this impossible choice, homelessness or hunger. and she chose homelessness, and now she's living on in a tent on the street. And you know, we need to see an end to the humanitarian catastrophe before we start to, you know, think about what happens in the long term.
Banu Bhatnagar, a very important point you make. Thank you so much for joining us, a spokesperson for Save the Children, and Dr. Najib Khamen, former Health Minister and Member of Parliament in Yemen. Thank you both, gentlemen, for being here on Straight Talk. That's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Melinda Nusafora. If you've got any comments or suggestions, do share them with us on Twitter with #StraightTalk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.